Be ready in just a second. Okay. Now I think we're back to our regular screen. Hi, Andrea. So hi, everybody. Welcome to our first Hangout on Air. As we approach our publication date for Living Candida Free, Andrea Nakayama, my co-author, and I thought it would be fun to talk a little bit about some of the topics that are related to the book. And so tonight we're going to talk about the title of our topic is there an ideal anti-Candida diet? And so we want to look at all the different aspects of the diet, and we're just going to have a real casual chat. And I thought that it would be great to, if anyone has any questions, we'll be looking at the Hangout event page throughout our talk tonight, so you can just post your questions there. And we got a couple already, and we'll answer those. So if you have any others, just post them right on the event page. And for people who missed this, you might be watching it on YouTube, so we'll be posting live on YouTube once we're done here. So just to start us off, I'm Ricki Heller of rickiheller.com. I'm a holistic nutritionist and a whole foods chef and a vegan chef, and I eat sugar-free. And as I just said, I'm about to publish the book Living Candida Free, which is a guidebook and recipe book for people on an anti-Candida diet. And with me tonight is my co-author, Andrea Nakayama. So great to see you, my buddy. Andrea and I, well, we're going to talk about how we met, but Andrea is the founder of Replenish PDX. She's a functional nutritionist, and she has a team of nutritionists working with her from Replenish PDX, and she's also the founder of Holistic Nutrition Lab, which is, I think of it as kind of university for functional nutritionists. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah. Absolutely. Next level education for people interested in holistic health coaching or holistic health practices that want to bring in more of where the food meets the physiology and bring that into their practices.
Yeah. So fantastic. And I'm so glad you're here tonight.
So excited to be here.
So we're going to have fun. So I guess we can get started. Let's just tell everybody a little bit about how we ended up working together, and then we can talk a little bit about the book. How does that sound?
That sounds great.
Okay. Do you want to go first, or should I?
Sure. Yeah, you know, as a functional nutritionist, I have some guidelines that are really important to me in terms of diet, and I do not believe that there's one size fits all when it comes to diet, or that there is an ideal diet, but I do believe in some foundational parameters for a healthier, healing diet. And for me, that always includes the removal of refined sugar, which is highly inflammatory. So as a nutritionist, I'm always looking for chefs who really fit the bill, and I'm scouring the internet, and by doing so, I happened upon Ricki's blog at the time, so it was Diet, Dessert, and Dogs at that time, and I reached out to her through Twitter, and we started a conversation, and then we ultimately got on the phone, and then we created a program together that's a really amazing program called You're Not the Boss of Me, Controlling Your Blood Sugar So It Doesn't Control You, which I see as the foundation of working with hormonal challenges when we start to address our blood sugar, not just Candida, but they go hand in hand. So that's the way that you and I met and started working together, Ricki, and we work so well together. Even when we have slightly different opinions about things, we're able to really work through them and have high-level conversations, which I really appreciate. And it was such an honor to work with you on the book.
Oh, thank you so much. I feel the same way. And I think a big part of the reason, well, I knew I loved working with you, obviously. As you said, it's just so much fun doing the Boss course. And when I was asked to write this book, although I am a functional nutritionist, I have never actually had a practice. I've worked more with the food aspect and recipe development and so on, and my own experience with Candida. So I don't have a science background, and I knew I wanted someone with really deep knowledge, whose knowledge I really respected and admired. And so Andrea was immediately the person that I thought of that I wanted to co-write this book with me. So that's what sort of led to us both working on this project together, and it's been a lot of fun. It's been a long haul, hasn't it, Andrea? But we're really coming up to the end now.
Yeah, it's been quite, you put in a tremendous amount of effort, and I was happy to write the pieces I did and support you through the thinking, but it was definitely the recipes are amazing, and all the effort you put into it is really phenomenal. I think everyone's going to love this book.
Oh, yay. Well, I hope so. And I hope it's going to help a lot of people. And we can talk about that a little bit later on, some of the ways maybe that the book is different, in my opinion, from some of the other ones out there. But one of the things you said earlier, I want to just maybe talk a little bit about that, because you talked about how we can have discussions even though we may come at the topic from different angles. And so people may not know that we actually have pretty well, I was going to say pretty different. They're different in some ways and similar in some ways, our diets. So I thought we could each tell the audience sort of what our own personal diet is, or where it is right now, maybe how you came to eating that way, and then I can talk a little bit about my diet with Candida.
Sure. Yeah, you want me to start?
Sure.
Yeah, so my diet is an ever-changing thing that is based on how I'm feeling and what I'm working on. I believe that digestive health is at the core of all health issues, which is where my interest in Candida really comes from, because dysbiosis can lead to a lot of problems, and it's usually, as I wrote about in the chapter, dysbiosis that leads to the allowance of Candida overgrowth. So for me, the dysbiosis has manifested in more adrenal and thyroid issues. I have Hashimoto's, which is autoimmune thyroid issues. And so I've changed my diet over time. I think when we first met, I was pesca vegan, so I ate fish, but otherwise mostly vegan, and no gluten, no dairy, no refined sugar. But over time, I have added more animal protein into my diet. I still believe in a high plant-based diet. I don't eat grains, or I eat grains only on occasion, and I only eat beans on occasion because the higher sugars in those foods don't sit so well with me. And I need sustained energy, as you said. I run a busy practice, I'm on a lot of interviews, I'm writing a lot, teaching a lot, and so I need sustained energy, and I find that that works best for me personally. So I don't eat a lot of animal protein, but I do eat animal protein. Then still, I would say, otherwise high plant-based and low glycemic.
Yeah. And that's the thing, I guess, where the major difference is between us. So my diet has also really evolved over the years. You know, when I tell the story of the first time I went on the anti-Candida diet, so this was like in the early 2000 or so, and I had been vegan without even realizing it. So I guess plant-based is a better term, not eating animal products. And of course, the first time I was very unhealthy. And when I saw the doctor who diagnosed Candida, she took blood tests, and the first thing she said to me after the test results was, "You've got to start eating some meat. You got to go eat some animal products, some protein," because my albumin levels were so low in my blood. So I went out and had a steak that night, and you can imagine what happened, right? Like, it was like a stone in my stomach. So that was not the best approach for me. Although at that time I did eat animal products like that. I was eating eggs at the time, I think chicken, whatever. So, and then when I realized it's just not something that I find, it's not the food that I'm drawn to, it's not the food that I like to eat. So I determined that I was going to try to do it differently this next time, which was in 2009 when I was diagnosed with Candida again. And so I follow a plant-based diet. I do eat grains, but I'm finding lately I eat fewer grains, and I do eat legumes. Right now, I think we've talked about this, Andrea, I had a really I guess, stressful summer finishing the book, and I didn't realize how much things were affecting me. And so I have decided to do, I'm sort of back in I'm calling it a reboot of stage 1 on this diet. So right now, I'm not eating fruit either, although normally I had already brought back some fruit. So I'm going to do this for a few weeks just to sort of, until things calm down again. But normally I will eat a little bit of fruit. I'm now at the stage where I've brought some foods back into my diet, like fruit, and I will have the occasional. I had been using coconut sugar and coconut nectar in my baking, so my previous book, Naturally Sweet and Gluten-Free, is all filled with baked goods, and those use coconut sugar, coconut nectar, and stevia. Right now I'm exclusively stevia as my sweetener, and plant-based. So yeah, we actually in the book brought these two ideas together, and I think that's our version of this diet. The other thing I wanted to maybe just talk about a little bit is all the other anti-candida diets out there, and we don't have to, you know, necessarily talk specifically about one or the other, but I think some of the issues that we talked about and that we considered when we were planning what diet we wanted to use.
Yeah, go for it. You want to start just what you found and what you were looking at and where we came in relation to that, and I'll chime in.
Sure, okay. So when I was doing the research, I mean, I had sort of pieced together for myself. I was working with a naturopath, and through my experience and what worked for me and what didn't work for me, we sort of came up with a diet for me. And it was based on what I had read in several different places. So I really chose the parts I liked because they felt good to me and they helped me get better. But when I look around, so where I think some of the things we do differently, or that I felt needed to be different, I know a lot of the diets. First of all, I'm going to talk about plant-based. A lot of the diets claim that you can be a vegan on this diet, and yet they don't actually give you a lot of options. So you might not be able to eat legumes, for instance, or you might not be able to eat most nuts initially. And if you're following a plant-based diet, that is really going to remove major sources of protein for you. It's going to make it a lot more difficult for you to find good sources of protein. So that was something I wanted to address in our version. And so what we've done is sort of a two-tiered system, if you want to think of it that way, where you can certainly follow the anti-candida diet in living candida free if you're 100% vegan, because all the recipes are 100% vegan. However, because Andrea has the experience with eating animal products, there's a whole section for people who want to bring in an omnivorous diet too. But I think giving two levels of the diet, so one is a little more strict than the other. If you prefer to cut back on the grains and the legumes, you can certainly do that. So that was one thing in terms of the protein. And then the other question that comes up a lot, which I think we were talking about earlier today, is different kinds of nuts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think we're one of the few that include cashews. And I was talking to you about levels of mold, right? Mm-hmm. So in my research, studies have shown that, you know, if you look at the top 5, the nuts with the top 5 mold content, or the top 5 nuts with the highest mold content, sorry, you know, all nuts and grains are going to have aflatoxins, which are the reason why often cited why you can't have peanuts or you can't have pistachios on an anti-candida diet. However, if you're looking at those with the most highest levels of mold, cashews are not really even in the top 5. So that was my reasoning. I think most nuts are fine, with the exception of peanuts and pistachios, because they're so high, and of course peanuts are highly allergenic too, right?
Right. Yeah, and there's a couple of things I want to say here, both in terms of, first of all, not eating any one kind of nut in excess, especially something like a cashew. So a lot of times people will get addicted to one kind of nut. So definitely working with some variation there as opposed to being fearful of the food. Second thing I want to say is that it really depends on the source. Like one thing you and I were talking about, Ricki, is that Brazil nuts are higher in mold than cashews are, but I think this is really about where you get them from. So I find that Brazil nuts taste rancid. They're the ones we always ate around as kids, right? Unless you get them from a really good source, right? when you get them from a good source and you store them properly, so I always store my nuts and seeds in the fridge or even in the freezer. I keep the Brazil nuts in the freezer, but I know that I've gotten them from a source where they're fresh, and I can taste if they're moldy or not. That's one thing we want to be thinking about. So I think when we just wipe certain foods that have important nutrients off the table, we might be missing certain things that we need in our diet. So definitely variety is key, the source is key, and then the other thing that's important when we come back to this notion of an ideal diet is how does it feel on your system. So nuts for some people are more difficult to digest and they're going to feel it, whereas for some of us they're great, and as you said, a great source of protein, especially if you're choosing a plant-based diet. You need all the support with protein that you can get because we need our proteins to heal. So really making sure that they're all those things, how they feel in your body, and then even considering, like we look at in the book, are they sprouted? Are they easier to digest? What are you doing so that you can more easily digest something?
Yeah. And, you know, I'm glad you talked about that, how some things don't work with some bodies. One of the questions which we looked at earlier, I'm going to just quickly read it out loud. What are your thoughts on very low carbohydrate diets? No, I'm sorry. Yeah, this is it. I have read claims that both yeast can feed on ketones and that ketosis causes the yeast to mutate in a more toxic fungus. Some initial reading of research articles online hasn't led me to satisfactory evidence one way or the other. And we were talking about, again, how that's almost, you can't, there's no one answer, yes, ketogenic, not ketogenic. And so, you know, I've been reading about the ketogenic diet too recently, and paleo, which is similar, maybe a step down. So because, for instance, coconut oil, it's known to be a really great antifungal food, and I was telling you this earlier, I began to increase the amount of coconut oil I was eating, and guess what? It did not sit well with me at all. My body doesn't like that much coconut oil, or even coconut products, I find, because one of my sweet treats, if I'm really craving, I'll do like a coconut milk ice cream, right? So if I'm eating ice cream, you know, a couple times a week or whatever, it's just too much for me. I can't process it well enough. So even though, in fact, it's true, coconut oil is a great antifungal, for me personally, there's a limit. And so I think that's one of the issues to keep in mind too. And this is what I answered to someone else's question about how long do you cut out grains, how long do you cut out fruit, and so on.
I just turn to that piece for a minute, because this brings us back to the concept of, is there an ideal diet? And I think there are some premises that you will find are common between most anti-Candida diets, and those are the places where we want as a foundation to start. And then I think what we do in the book is give you some room to play with depending on what your system is able to work with. Because when you have Candida, when there's that much dysbiosis in the gut, there could be difficulties breaking down and utilizing certain macronutrients, one of them being fats. So if there's issues in the small intestine, which are really the place where most fat is broken down, there's a little broken down in the mouth, there could be difficulties there, and we might want to get to the root of that instead of overloading the system with a class of foods that's supposed to be good or supposed to be ideal if it doesn't feel right in your body.
Yeah, exactly. And, you know I've been dealing with leaky gut over the years, like, for sure. And I think pretty much anyone who has Candida is most likely dealing with leaky gut, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I do want to make sure, because my time flies, but I'd like to make sure that we address people's questions. So just in terms of the one I mentioned in passing, and how long do you need to cut out beans, fruit, and starchy vegetables? Everyone has a different idea on whether they should be allowed or not. Also, when your Candida is under control, is it okay to add in everything you excluded? I'm guessing sugar in small amounts. Well, that was a question I replied on Google Plus without realizing I was replying in public. So you sort of know what I think. But again, I mean, it's like Andrea was just saying, it's what works for your body. And I'm not trying to be evasive by saying that. it really is true. What works for one person may not work for another. Or you may be able to eat 90% of the same foods as someone else on an anti-candida diet, but that other 10% doesn't work for you. I have found with me, like with the coconut oil, what works at one point may not work at another point. So I think it's imperative, like as Andrea just said, there are some basic premises that every diet has in common, and obviously you're not going to be eating sugar, you're not going to be eating yeast, you're not going to be eating moldy foods, but beyond that, you can honestly, as I say in the book, you can honestly find almost as many diets as there are people with Candida. And from what you read, many of them work, right? So what they often have in common, and tell me, and correct me if I'm wrong, Andrea, is that they're working on correcting the imbalances and strengthening the immune system, which allows your body then to fight again.
This is where addressing the inside is really an important piece, and that's why there isn't a perfect diet. It's the place where the food meets the physiology, and there's an imbalance in the physiology, which is what I really dive into in that first chapter in the book, so that you can understand what is this thing that's Candida. And as opposed to saying there's no one diet for everybody being an evasive question, I want to invite the possibility that it's actually a invitation to take more ownership about how things feel in your body. And I think that often we're looking for the perfect diet or the perfect physician who's going to give us the perfect antifungal or the perfect pill or the perfect set of nutraceuticals. And unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. And that's the premise of a functional practice, is that it's really about developing a relationship with your body and listening to your signs and symptoms. So it's not about being evasive, it's about giving you an invitation to really listen in to your body.
I like that. Although, so you mean there's nobody's going to give me like the perfect set of thighs or something, for instance, unfortunately. Okay, I got to do it. So, okay. There's one other question on the page that I just want to quickly look at. This is from Kim, who was in one of my courses. I've been hearing a lot about SIBO. How does that interrelate with Candida? And do Candida protocols help with SIBO? This may be a little bit beyond what we can talk about tonight, but did you want to say anything about that, Andrea?
Yeah, so SIBO is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and this is where the bacteria from the colon and the bacteria that can enter from the upper digestive system, from the stomach, move into the small intestine and create more havoc there. So it's definitely a possibility that somebody with Candida, because there's that imbalance, could have leaked through into the small intestine and have bacterial overgrowth and dysbiosis in that area of the body, which is not easy to tame or to manage, but that's more prevalent than this concept of systemic Candida that we hear about. And while I was doing research for the book, I got to speak to an infectious disease doctor who said if somebody has systemic Candida in the blood, they're in the hospital not functional. And so this idea that we have that, like, oh, I have systemic Candida, and you're walking around talking about it, is likely not the case. So it likely is contained in the intestinal tract, but there is the possibility that there could be dysbiosis then that's moved into the small intestine, which then affects fat digestion and all of that.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say, I think the difference is in the approach. So in conventional allopathic medicine, when they talk about systemic Candida, it is exactly that, candidiasis, which is a blood infection. But among alternative professionals, you know, like my naturopath has talked about systemic Candida, but we need to understand that they're not talking about that same thing.
Right.
And they're talking about the Candida overgrowth that begins in the gut and may affect other systems. Because I know my symptoms, for instance, were not all gut related, and that's what happens ultimately once the Candida begins to, once it's exacerbated and things get a little more.
And anything that is rooted in the gut is going to have symptoms everywhere in the body because there's toxins that are released from the Candida. It's like the Candida poops and leaves toxins for your body to have to deal with. It's going to affect your brain because the gut and brain are so connected. It's going to affect your skin and your mood and your metabolism, so that there's a systemic effect as opposed to a systemic population.
Right. Okay. Well, if anyone else has any other questions for us, we have a Q&A, and I'm still learning the technology, but I think we've got it up there. You should be able to just type in your questions, and we will see them on our screen here. We've talked about the ones that are on the Hangout page, and I just wanted to, so we can talk, maybe wrap up a little bit about our approach. So the other thing that is included in the book that I think, besides the fact that we are open to both kinds of diets, and I've not seen an approach that really is one that would be accessible to plant-based eaters before. But I think the other thing that is really different about this book is I really wanted it to be a practical guidebook for people so that when you are on this diet, you can still live in the world. And that was something that I found a lot of the other books, although there are recommendations, and I used those books when I was first on the diet too, and they're very helpful. But, you know, how do I cook? What if I have a whole repertoire of recipes, and now what do I do with them? Can I still go to parties? All those kinds of things. But so that's a topic maybe for another hangout. But those are the kinds of things that we address in the book. And I've been following what I say is one form or another of the anti-Candida diet now for 6 years. I consider myself on maintenance. And so I guess this goes back to the earlier question about can you bring back sugar at some point? For me, the answer is no. I know I cannot. And in fact, that is one thing that never even occurred to me. When I looked at coconut sugar, coconut nectar, low glycemic, trying them out to see how my body reacted. But white sugar is an absolute no-no. And I see you shaking your head, Andrea, so you agree.
Yeah, and I'd love to talk. We have more Google Hangouts coming up, so I know some things that would be really fun that I think everybody would appreciate talking about. And I think, you know, living in the real world is really important, and I'm wondering, Ricki, if you can share with us one of your favorite recipes in the book, just because I think that, I don't know if one comes to mind. I didn't ask you in advance. You're like,
no, I can, because you know me, I'm a sweets lover. I call it emergency fudge. And the reason I call it emergency fudge is because if you are overcome by a really strong sweets craving, you want to be able to get something right away. And so this fudge is ready in 5 minutes, and it only makes enough for one little snack. So you're not going to be going overboard. You'll have something to hit that sweet craving, and it tastes like fudge, which is great. So that's one of my favorite recipes. I'm going to give you another one because of the savory. We have a lot of, I tried to balance really quick and easy with a little more complicated, and things that you would perhaps want to serve to other people if you had guests over for dinner or something. So I have a recipe in there. I grew up, my mom used to make an eggplant parmesan. Have you ever had that, Andrea?
Yeah.
And, you know, like, of course, my mom's had cheese and, you know, all these layers of fatty stuff. She fried her eggplant. So what I've done is I've created an eggplant parmesan that I think tastes like eggplant parmesan. And my husband, who is an omnivore, who's like a meat guy, he loves it. So I would say, even though that one's one of the more labor-intense recipes, it makes a huge batch, and then I always freeze the leftovers. So that one requires a little more work, but it's so worth it because it's just delicious. So yeah, that's one of my favorites.
That's great. Yeah, and you know, I want to say too that knock on wood, I haven't tested positive for having Candida overgrowth, but this is the way I eat, and I've had many clients with Candida and have worked with many protocols in many different realms of testing. But even for those of us who don't have that kind of overgrowth, this is really foundational eating. It's the important things that we need to tend towards. So I'm hopeful that people will understand that this is a way of life and not just a punishment for Candida.
And that's exactly what I've been trying to say, is it doesn't have to feel like a punishment. And I totally agree. I think you can follow this diet. It gives you everything you need to be healthy and to feel satisfied. I do not feel deprived. I get my treats. I eat well. So I think that, like any, really, when someone's on a diet, if you start a diet for weight loss or whatever, the idea is to be able to continue. Suddenly I started getting my, here it goes. Are you hearing me twice?
I'm not hearing you twice, but
okay, so I'm going to ignore it because I don't know what it looks like Christy. It might be. Christy, if you have your microphone on, can you turn it on? Thank you. Okay, we're just about ready. Actually, I'm just going to check if there are any more questions on the Google Hangout page. But I wanted to actually tell you folks about one more thing before we go, and that's we're having a bonus offer for people who pre-order the book. And I've mentioned this on my Facebook page and on my blog. But anyone who pre-orders the book, if you email me your transaction receipt from Amazon, you can either forward that email that you get from them or just email the transaction number. And I've got a bonus pack of 10 recipes that aren't in the book. And I'm going to see if I can figure out how to do this so that you guys can see them. Screen share. Here we are. There. So this is just. Can you see that collage, Andrea?
Not yet, but there we go. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So these are some of the recipes that I've been developing, and we're going to give these to people as a bonus for pre-orders, and you'll get it as soon as the book is available before other people get it. So this on the upper right is some green chocolate chip cookies. We've got under that what I call red hot cranberry smoothie. These are grain-free brownies with frosting, and this is a grain-free. So those are all the ones that I put on the screen, but basically, there we go. Basically, we're going to have 10 recipes who order the book. So if you're thinking about getting it, now is the time to order. So let me know your transaction number, and then we'll get that extra bonus pack to you.
Brilliant. Recipes.
Yeah.
I want brownies right now.
Good. I was going to bring one to hold it up, but then I thought let it. Okay, well, I don't want to keep people too long. I don't see any other questions, so if people have questions, you can always leave them on that page. And the other thing I'm going to say is if you have ideas about specific topics you'd like us to cover in the other two hangouts, we've got two more before the book comes out in January, please leave a comment on the hangout page or on the Facebook page. It's Replenish PDX. If you're on Facebook at Replenish PDX, right, as well?
And Holistic Nutrition Lab. There's both locations, but Replenish PDX or Holistic Nutrition Lab on Facebook.
Okay, great. And then we'll be sure to deal with those questions in one of our next.
Yeah, lots more to discuss, and we look forward to hanging out with you all. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Thanks for coming tonight. Talk to you soon. Bye, Andrea.
Bye, Ricki.